So Jenny, it is now 8:02. And so we're a little bit behind where we normally are at this point, but over to you to kick things off here.
Thank you. Let's get the slide deck up here. And there we go. Our first slide there this morning. So keep the messages coming in the chat. It is always good to hear from you. So many familiar names in there, and no doubt some newcomers as well. So welcome if it's your first time. You come straight into it, but now we have the chat open. And if you're joining us again, we are really, really pleased to see you. As always, we do start with land acknowledgement and a recognition moment. And the photo that you can see on the slide there, taken by our good friend Lauren, was one of the early Mondays of school starting, or SATE starting, term starting. And I used to be a teacher. Not a lot of people know that. I was a real teacher. I don't call myself a real teacher anymore, in a school in England. And I love September, back to school, fresh starts, fresh calendars, new stationery. I am a stationery snob. And it was all very forward-looking and exciting. And what we know is that back to school isn't full of excitement. And so for a lot of our Indigenous friends, it's full of trauma. And there's some connection. There's a lot of connection to the residential schools, the survivors and their families. So this TP is put up at the beginning of every school year at SATE, and it welcomes our Indigenous students. And it also reminds us that we understand and we acknowledge that the return to school has a different context for an awful lot of people. So as we start today, we want to acknowledge that SATE is situated on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy. That area encompasses our Indigenous people of the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. That is the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda First Nations, which includes the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. So thank you, wherever you are joining us from. I heard Craig say someone in Ontario. We have no doubt you come from far and wide. Thanks for just taking a moment this morning with us to acknowledge where you're situated today.
Excellent. Thank you, Jenny. Yeah, and I think we've actually gone further east. I believe Tim is in Montreal, so we're almost getting coast to coast here. So folks, we're back. I hope you've had a great summer. We have missed being here, and bonjour indeed. Thank you, Tim. We have missed being here, and we're excited to be back. And we were thinking about how we were going to kick off this fall session. And you know, Jenny's talking about fresh starts, and we came up with this little playful piece around, you know, WTF. You know, what are the F's of leadership? And potentially, you know, does the F word belong in the workplace? That's a totally different subject, but one we may or may not get to today. Just out of curiosity, we would love to hear from you in the chat. You know, what are your leadership F's? If you have any that come top of mind, we would love to see that. We've got a couple in mind that we want to talk about today. Frantic, there's an interesting one. Frantic, follow through, frustrated, fearless, flexibility. Wow, look at all this. Flub.
Yeah.
Not to be confused with flubber. Frank. Oh, I like that. Fatigue. Yes. Although I hope we're getting a little bit better in terms of leaders in our level of fatigue compared to where we might have been a year and a half, 2 years ago at this time. Fun. Absolutely, Lisa. I could not agree more. And we certainly try to have some fun here these mornings. Fresh. I would like that one might be interesting to dig into a little bit as well.
So, you know, I'm sitting here now in panic.
Panic is not an F word, Jenny.
I know, I can't use it today. Okay.
It might be fear. Okay. So, but no, there's lots in here, and you know, I'm not surprised to see some of these things. Aaron, that is really good. F, genuine caring. That is well done.
We could do that in any one of them, couldn't we? Good.
Yeah, that's good. How to take F initiative. And so, Jenny, I think there's a couple things that come to mind for me, or at least when we were preparing for today. And folks, please do keep the chat going. If you have specific questions, Again, as a reminder for those of you, if there are specific questions, please do pop them in the Q&A. And if you're not sure where the Q&A button is, if you were in the chat, just look 2 buttons to the left. So fellowship, also a good one. So Jenny, I think some of the things that come to mind for me as a leader, and I recently read a book over the summer on sales leadership, and it was, interestingly enough, did not spark our conversation at all. But this leadership framework, this sales framework was built around 5 F's: focus, field. In other words, you have the right players on the field, fundamentals, forecast, and fun. So focus and fun, popped in there right away. But I think the biggest thing for me that always comes to mind when I'm thinking about leadership or leading a team or as a leader is focus. There's a couple ways you can go with this, right? As a leader, you need to be able to figure out what you need to focus on any given day, week, month, year, whatever your planning cycle may be. So there's lots to say that trying to plan more than 2 years in advance right now is just, and a really interesting exercise in futility. But
that's good.
And then how you help your team focus. And so just maybe we could start there. And folks, if anything comes to mind, please do, as we're talking about focus. Let's hear your questions and your thoughts. But what are your thoughts on focus, Jenny?
Okay. I would start with, what are you focusing on? That's exactly where I would start. And one of my big pieces that comes from our sort of time management brain is we talk all the time about priorities. And there are priorities coming out of our yin yangs, and lots of us wear different hats, and everybody that we wear a different hat for has a different list of priorities. And all of a sudden we're swimming in priorities and we don't know what to focus on. So let's go back to the word. Originally, I think, came into the English language around the 1400s, and it was singular. Absolutely singular. You could only have a priority. One thing was the first thing, or prior, in that old language. And it was the same for about 500 years. It's only in the 1900s that we have switched it to become plural. And it's only in the 1900s that we created management, and we created hierarchy, and we created everything else. So there might be a connection there. So as a leader, what do you want your people to focus on? Like, what is the key priority? Your book was on selling. The key priority is on probably a number or a metric that you have to reach in those sales. So that's the priority. And then everything streams from there. But here's the key as a leader. If you're not talking about it, your people aren't even thinking about it. Just because you say it at the beginning of a year, we're talking about September earlier, or, in a team meeting, our new priority is, they don't love it as much as you do, and they're not as attached to it as much as you are. So how are you going to talk about that in every meeting, in your sort of communications as well? Focus on that main priority. And then for yourself, if you're not the leader, but you're on a team, or even our leaders are on a team, as you start the day, do you know what your priority is? What's the non-negotiable for the day? It'll be a disaster if I don't get this done. Where does that fit? That's where I would start.
Yeah, your thought around priorities and priority. I just saw a couple of comments in the chat here. Tony, focus on the goal, and I do. I think I totally agree. The fact that the word priorities exists is quite interesting. But I think it's, for me, it's how can you take goals that are aimed at fulfilling a single priority, right? So within any sort of area of focus or any sort of job that needs to get done, there is an overarching priority. We are doing this because this, right? But to achieve that, you may have different goals along the way. And so I think the piece that you touched on there that I quite like, and I often struggle with, is that is the communication piece of how to keep people focused on that without also sounding like a broken record.
Yeah.
And I know there's probably half a dozen people on this call right now who are on my team who all just laugh at that comment. But I think the communication piece is huge. And within that too, I think the leader also needs to be focusing on the today and the future, right? So you have priorities today or goals today to achieve a priority that you need to communicate to your team to keep them focused. But you also need to be thinking about what's happening 3, 6, 9, 12 months down the road. So I don't know if that sparks anything there to parse out or not.
Okay, so you snuck a little extra F in there, which was very cool, the future piece. And I'm winning so far. It's Friday. You quite liked it, so I'm making some progress here as well. So, yes, Tim, I think put in the chat, repetition is highly undervalued. It is. It feels like a broken record as the leader doing it. But again, if it's not consistent, and especially if you have people either hybrid or you're working remote, like that cadence has to increase. The other thing, and sort of flashback, I think we've talked about this a lot too, it isn't all on you. So, your team can do that with each other as well. So there's a cadence and a rhythm in that. It doesn't always have to come from the leader. It's sparking the conversation. And the piece that just stuck with me, actually behind me somewhere in there, is a book called Will It Make the Boat Go Faster? And it's a story of a British rowing team, and they were rubbish in one Olympics, and they wanted to win in the next Olympics. And of course they did. We wouldn't have the book or the franchise or everything if they didn't. But the way they got there was that one question. It was all about, that was their big goal. Now, you cannot win at the Olympics without all those buckets that you were talking about. Like, it's not just rowing on the water. But everything that they did was defined by the question, will it make the boat go faster? So they're looking at nutrition. The question is, will it make the boat go faster? Yeah, well, okay, well, we'll do this. They're looking at mental game. Is this going to make the boat go faster? Actually, this practice isn't. Okay, we're not doing it. We won't pick it up. So I think you can still hold that priority piece, and our lives are busy. Our jobs aren't just one single goal, but in most cases we feed in to a place. And we're not saying this is the only conversation, but it has to be a continuous conversation if the momentum is going to keep going.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, is that Ben Ainsley? That was the focus on the. Anyway, never mind. We'll come back.
Now you test it. I'd have to turn around and find it.
That's okay. And so, agreed. And I think sometimes where my frustration is, or where I think I perceive other leaders would become frustrated, is the belief that once a goal is shared and perhaps reinforced a couple of times, is that there is buy-in and complete. We are now all aligned. So I guess it does speak to that need to. Yes, repetition is reinforcement and undervalued. I agree. There is a reason that we see ads for something so many times, right?
Yeah.
It works.
The buy-in's interesting. Buy-in is coercion, isn't it? And so when we're sharing the goal, when we're creating the goal, we're going to come back to this again, time and time again. It's the conversation, isn't it? You don't have to pull people with you. How do you get them to be a part of that and recognize that and feed on that fuel? There's another F I don't think I've seen yet, is fuel. So yeah, it's curious. And I didn't touch on your future piece too, but that's important, because as a leader, yes, you're going this way, but you've also got to be scanning the future and connecting the dots. I mean, I loved what you said at the beginning. Even a 2-year plan is getting a little silly at the moment.
Yeah.
And so it's constantly scanning and connecting those dots. That awareness piece is crucial.
Yeah. Richard, Mandy, you need engagement. Obviously, you have to, as a leader, you need to be able to figure out how to create that environment of engagement, right? I think as leaders, we sometimes get perhaps hung up in trying to engage or motivate an individual, when in reality, all you can do is create the environment where they want to be engaged and motivated. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, a secret sauce for engagement. If you want to engage your people, engage them, involve them in the conversation.
Absolutely.
It's that simple.
Yeah. And just, I saw it come by here in the chat, Jackie. Yes, a great call out, Essentialism by Greg McKeown.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was great.
Yeah. It's not, I believe that's the one that is, what is the one thing I can do now that basically makes everything else irrelevant?
It's all about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all about that. And that's probably where my English priority came from too. It's a good call. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I see a question here. Vis, where would strategy fit in? Yeah, it's not an F, but yeah, I would call that focus on the future. Focus on, if I pull the example from the sales book I was reading, it's about, the field, right? What players do you have on the team? What resources are you utilizing? What tools do you need to develop or drop or change? And that's my thought there right now, is that, strategy really is about using resources to get the most out of current and future efforts. I think maybe that's oversimplifying it, but Jenny, what are your thoughts?
No, I agree. And I think I think what we've learned from that pandemic time and all the shifting and all the transitioning that's going on is, I just use the word again, it's not an F, we'll try. But it's that scanning, that you're constantly looking to what's coming next. And in order to go to what's coming next, you have to go outside of your box, the box being your organization or your job, or like, this is too narrow to stay here. There's probably a lot in that Simon Sinek angle. We used to look at our competitors as an absolute rival. And now we're changing the frame of that as to how we look at what they're up to. There's times when they're ahead and we're behind, and that's okay, like, because it'll change and it'll work. And so then where's our focus going to go to? And, I love what you said in there too, in terms of, who are my people? And somebody popped this in the chat earlier as well. What are their strengths? And how will that combine with where we want to go to? And how will that work? Like in days of old, we were very much, well, Jenny, you're in this box and that's all that you're allowed to do because that's your job description. Whereas now we're far more flexible, there you go, in terms of, okay, I have these people and Jenny's really good at this. So let's get her to do more of that. And then here's the connection, join the dots. Oh, if she's doing something that she's got a strength in and she enjoys doing it, she's naturally going to go engage in that. And I will. Yeah. And also be aware of too, sometimes, okay, I've got strengths in this, I love doing this. And then part of our growth is, you know what, Craig, I'd really like to get better at this. And that's the mastery piece, and that fuels us and that engages us as well. So people often get scared when I say, okay, let everybody work from their strengths. You'll immediately up the happiness, the satisfaction, the engagement. Yeah, but we still have to get this stuff done. Yeah. And sometimes we want to get better in those places too, but that you only find that out via conversation.
Yeah, that's interesting. Buckingham's latest book actually touches on this a bit, and he's, you could probably look back to Marcus Buckingham as being the godfather of work from your strengths, him and Clifton, right? But a key distinction that he does draw out is that when you talk about, and I think leaders can sometimes struggle with this if they are thinking about, well, it's great, what a great theory to let my people work from their strengths, right? Find what they do best and let them do that. But then they think they have to do it all the time. Like 9 to 5, your entire day needs to be filled with, taking care of your strengths. But to your point, that can't be. You have to be able to leverage your strengths every day, I think, to become more fulfilled, right?
Like it. Yeah.
But you can't do your strength every minute of every single day. We all have stuff we have to take care of, right? I am not fulfilled by taking out the garbage from the home office, but it needs to be done.
There's a WTF in there, but we
yeah, exactly. A lot of teams lose focus because of competing priorities. Absolutely, Tony. And I think that's to kind of close a loop on this whole piece around priorities and focus. If you haven't, go and take a read of Simon Sinek's Infinite Game as well, because it does really kind of bring that whole piece around, finite teams really are I think can get too lost in the competing priorities versus the longer term vision. So that is, it's a great read.
Sorry, I'm going
Yeah.
to say that for 1 second, because I think I'm sorry, so I thought of the word fence actually. But as a leader in that competing priority, sometimes your responsibility, your accountability is almost to provide the fence for your team. And help with those competing priorities. Like, we don't always get it right as an organization, and you've got, almost two departments fighting against each other. And let's acknowledge that. Let's have a conversation about that and figure I'm winning today, figure that out so that everybody can move forwards. Because as you just put it on there, that's the infinite game part of it. It's not I win today, you lose.
Yeah. So you're going was it Roy Rogers who said, "Don't fence me in"? Sorry, I'm channeling my grandfather's record collection. Those might have been 78s. But yeah, the idea of fence, I do like that. Question here from Brent. People love comfort, and that often defaults to status quo. Has the pandemic shaken everyone into a future flexibility mindset? That's interesting.
Can you say that again for me, please?
People love comfort. Yeah, people love comfort, and that often defaults to status quo. Has the pandemic shaken everyone into a future and or flexible mindset? So my take on this question is that, are we becoming more flexible in our thinking, or more open to flexibility? And Brent, feel free to pop in the chat if I'm off base there. I think probably for me, I think it also ties back to the first F we had here, is that I think it's really changed people's focus, and they've also realized through the past 2.5 years what it's important for them to focus on. But has the pandemic shaken everyone into a future and or flexible mindset?
So I think the flexible is a really good one. It's a really topical piece as well. And I think when we talk about flexibility, we have to recognize, even with everything that's happened in the pandemic, there are those who will, it's almost like a state and trait piece. There are those who naturally have that flexibility and can pivot on a dime, love the idea of every day not being the same. And then there are those who don't. And that's not wrong, that's just the way that they are, but that's really difficult for those of us who, like, I can't think of anything worse than doing the same thing every single day. But there are people who love it, and there's comfort in that. And then the flexibility, some of us found greater flexibility and more future focus. And to your point, they're looking for what can be different, where can I be flexible? So is kind of the awareness of the two, especially if you're a leader, because you're going to have both on your team if your team is any size. And in that flexibility, be very, very careful. If you're highly flexible, just ensure that your reality testing is as good as your flexibility, because, pivoting when it's not required, not needed, or as a leader, changing the goalposts when we don't need to change the goalposts, and all those pieces can really interrupt the flow and actually to an extent damage the flexibility. And then as a leader too, that awareness of those who find it really hard. And sometimes you can move them a little bit, and sometimes it's a much longer game than that. But what we do know is that change is now constant. Like, we're constantly in it. But we're also, for those who've got people on their team who are stuck, in fact, I said to a lady this week, she said, I don't like change. I don't like it. And I said, okay. I said, she didn't mention that she was married. I said, you got married. Was that good? She said, oh yeah, that was good. I went, well, that was a change, was it not? She's like, yeah. I said, okay, have you moved house recently? She goes, actually, we did 2 years ago. I said, how's that? Oh, it's great. Okay, well, that was a change. And so sometimes we just need to recognize that change isn't always bad. We've put a connotation on it because of the pressure that we've been under, I think.
Yeah. And the thing that you touched on there, and there's another question from Vincent that I'll jump to after this, but you do the flexibility and focus, I think for me, just kind of came to mind as being on a bit of a continuum. Right? because you do have to be able to focus to achieve a goal, right? And you do have to be flexible enough to be able to adjust when situation requires it. But I think we've all had leaders who are looking at the next great thing, or they've had shiny, let's call it flashy object syndrome, to carry on with the F theme this morning. And we all know how frustrating that can be, trying to keep up with okay, what's coming next. So you do have to find that balance in there for sure. Vincent, Adam Grant recently pointed out that people are generally really good at change in their personal lives. So why is it hard for some leaders at work? How do we foster that sense of change and growth mindset in leaders? You first.
Yeah, it's an awareness, I think. It's amazing how times we often hear that, oh, I'm good at this in my personal life, I'm not good at this in my work life, or I'm really focused in my work life and I'm useless in my personal life. And I forget who said it, but that whole analogy of, if you think of yourself as an orange, if you squeeze an orange here, you get orange juice. If you squeeze an orange here, you get orange juice. You are the same person. And so I would go to what's stopping that? What's the obstacle? And in there, and here's another F that we haven't embarked on yet, behind every inaction is a fear of some kind.
Yeah.
What's the fear?
Yeah.
And there's a WTF for us as well. Boom.
Yeah. Yeah, I know it's interesting. I think Jody touched on where my thought process was going on this. People are good at changing their personal lives. Well, some would argue, is that actually true? How many people do you know say, I'm going to start a diet, I'm going to lose weight, and then a year, a week after January 1st, they've fallen back. But I think the piece there is, and where my head goes on this, is in your personal life, there's probably a greater sense of personal reward, I don't know what you would want to take from it, but it's personal. I think is what I'm coming to. At work, it's maybe less personal. As a leader, you would love to think that everybody, well, maybe you wouldn't, but you would love to think that people are almost as motivated in their work lives to be as fulfilled and give as much as they do in their personal lives, because you've created such a great environment that they want to come and do that. Maybe that's not the case. We know that the vast majority of people that go to work every day are probably just happy going to work and doing their job and going home. Right? If you take a look at a bell curve, there's those out on this end of the tail who are happy to go to work and not get fired because they're not doing their job. And there's others out at this end that are, really wanting to push the envelope and move up. So I think that's, how do you foster that sense of change and growth mindset in leaders? I think that's, it's an interesting one. But I do, sorry, go ahead.
No, I think we have to remember too, when we talk about, I like that, fostering growth or I forget what the first word, and then mindset. That growth mindset, is that a lot of growth mindset comes from what you just talked about, creating that environment. And so back to, what are the beliefs? What is the focus? What are the challenges that we're offering? And here's the key, absolute key: you can't have a challenge without the support. So that support from that leader is absolutely essential. And within there, then we could lean into that. And I love that somebody put feed forward in the chat. Thank you. Feedback or feed forward, whichever way you want to look at it, that's crucial. And those are the parts that create that environment. And as you're chatting there, we always want to, when we get people who just want to do their job, or in the moment there's tons on quiet quitting, and we want to blame the people. I'm not sure it is the people. Like if you're simply just doing your job, okay, there's always a different story. So some people, that's all that they can do. We don't know what's going on in the rest of their lives. Yeah. But for a lot, it's all about the environment. And it's all about our engagement. And we're right back to that engagement piece. If you want to engage your people, do that, go have that conversation, build that energy, build that enthusiasm. We might have to have an e-day, and then grow from there, because that's where the challenges come from. That's where we really click in, I think.
Yeah. And, you think you just also triggered something for me too, is that, in that generalization of that bell curve that I described, you may have somebody at any point in that bell curve who is going through something which changes where they're at, right?
Yep.
You can't give 100%, 110% every day. I'm thinking of Scotty telling Kirk, I can't push it any harder. Sorry. Okay. You touched on something that also came up in the early piece, shifting gears from focus to fear. Right? Because I think that came up a bit in the early piece. When we talk about fear as it relates to leadership, there's a couple things that come to my mind. One is around, and we've chatted about this in earlier conversations, imposter syndrome. Like, it's the fear of, am I really supposed to be here doing this? I often face that every Friday morning just before we hit start here, just so you know. But the other thing is, fear for me can also be tied to conflict. Like, are you avoiding conflict? So you want to dig into either angles there or take it a different direction too. That's entirely fine.
No, I really like what you just said, actually, in that when we think about fear, what are you avoiding? Because often, I spend a lot of time hanging out, chatting with people like, I'm good, I got this. I've got the courage piece. I don't have fear anymore. But when you ask the question, what have you avoided recently? There's lots and lots of answers. And it's interesting that you brought conflict up, because that is one of the biggest ones. We will, and guilty, absolutely guilty. We will put off a difficult conversation for days in some cases. I've talked to SVPs who would rather take a sick day than have that conversation that needs to be had. So that's the first question, I think, for me. What are you avoiding? And then we really, really have to look at, what are you creating as well? Because often, for example, in a conversation, we avoid the conversation because of our perceived sense of what the outcome will be. And the key word in that is perceived. So we've created a story, and 9 times out of 10, we have created something much, much worse than it would ever be. And that comes a lot, I think, to, in the past decade, probably, we've really created this workplace where you have to be perfect. You have to prove yourself. And a lot of us, not everybody, but a lot of us are people pleasers too. And so those difficult conversations are difficult, because you're going to smash each one of those. You're going to get it wrong at some point, especially with the way that we're really leaning in and doing a better job. We're nowhere near, but we're doing a better job of inclusive behaviors and stuff. It's not going to be right every time. And you if you're constantly proving yourself, you're exhausted. And that perfectionism, well, no one's getting in there either. So what are you avoiding? What's the obstacle behind it? And then what's that story that you're creating about it? And often just even talking about that breaks it down. And so I think I've said this before on here, but if I start a conversation with you, like, Craig, here's a story that I'm telling myself. What does it look like from your side? Just give them the conversation, let them talk, because they will talk. And then you'll get more from that piece. Or even, one of our daughters always says to me, I hate it when I cry, Mum. And I gave it to her. You cry when you're happy, you cry when you're excited, you cry when you're sad, you cry when you're frustrated. And so, but it's okay, start that. This conversation is really difficult. And I apologize if my emotions leak whilst we're having this conversation, or, whatever is to that line.
Yeah.
But when we start it, that fear drops pretty quickly. So it's that perceived threat, and setting yourself up for success.
Yeah. It's funny how the brain can, tie yourself in knots, right? The stories that you do tell yourself about the potential outcomes of a difficult conversation. And I think that the piece that you leaned into there that I really like, that I don't think leaders do enough of, is, call it vulnerability, call it what you want, but starting those conversations just the way you talked about, right? This is going to be difficult, and I'm sorry if I don't get it right. I think leaders sometimes feel they have to go into they make them difficult because they feel they have to go in and lead the perfect difficult conversation, right? And you have to be, a model of stoicism and being able to, emotionally detach from the difficult conversation and just stick to the script. I think can make it so incredibly difficult, but sharing up front that it's tough for you as well does humanize things a bit.
Well, and that's exactly it. Like it is vulnerability. And what you just said is right, is that's the human connection. That's where engagement comes from too, by the way. That's the human connection. And in order to sort of really live that vulnerability, you're looking at emotional exposure. Like, this is tough. And it's super hard too if you're working from mad, sad, and glad, because you've only got 3 ways to do that. So, building that piece and getting used to that is helpful. Yeah. And there's a risk. And there's a risk in every conversation. We never know how it's going to go in any conversation. But as you say, when we let that creative storyteller turn this conversation into something truly that it's not, we've increased the risk unnecessarily. So rather than the sort of the artist, the creative one, pull in your scientist. What are the facts that I have? What's my reality? We mentioned that earlier. Here's the reality as I see it. And I want to find out what their reality is, because both of us are right at this point. And then that helps that conversation.
Yeah, there's often 3 sides, right? Your perception of it, my perception of it, and what it actually is. So
there you go.
Another question here that I want to get to, it kind of fits in. I think it came from the earlier conversation, but Lyle is posing the question of, what's our opinion on why we are experiencing the Great Resignation? Is it because of poor leadership?
Sometimes. And there's always a yes and. Like, I think this is where it gets really interesting, is we really want to pick up something and package it and promote it. And in some cases, people have recognized that, yes, okay, I don't want to work in this situation under this person anymore. So they're looking for something different. In some cases, I think people have actually recognized, once we strip away everything that we had before and we were, here doing our job, I can do something different. I'm not actually that engaged in this.
Yeah.
And one thing the pandemic's shown us is that we can shift and transition into something else. So I'm not sure that we could blanket it and say, yep, it's poor leadership. I do think that in the pandemic, and possibly still now, we have a lot of leaders who are, I appreciated what you said at the beginning, maybe less fatigued, I hope so, if they've had the time for self-care. Yeah. But I still think they're screaming for help, because we're moving at such a rate. How do you keep up with that? And how do you keep up with the people and the initiatives that seem to be reigning in many, like, let's just start another initiative and another one and another one. And, I'm going to go for, okay, what can we stop doing? And calm the chaos as well. So I don't have a perfect answer to Lyle's question. I read a lot on it and I always think yes and. Yes and.
Yeah, I think there is a bit of yes and in there. And I think the other side of this too is that I'm not sure in pre-pandemic time there was as much focus on the workplace and as much reporting on the workplace and how we are working and what you would see job reports, you would see unemployment rates, but I don't think there was as much focus on the makeup of the workplace and the reporting on it and how people were choosing to work and where they were choosing to work and so on. So it's a little bit of what you focus on gets reported, and what gets reported on also gets affected. And so I think there's something in there as well, not to diminish the fact that, we are seeing a change in the workplace, right? It's happening. But I think by nature of us focusing and reporting on it constantly, it would seem in the past, open up LinkedIn over the past 3 months, that's all you're seeing is quiet resignation, right? So, okay. To wrap up, before we get into the kind of takeaways, I think an important F here that I saw come through and that we wanted to chat about as well, and what a great way to finish the conversation on a Friday, is to talk about fun.
Yes, I'll just do a quick nod to Kay and Gillian in the chat too, because we think that they recognize that we know what's important now. That was a good piece to add there.
Yes.
But too fun and and fun. And somebody put really early in the chat, fun work needs to be fun, and let's define fun as well. So it doesn't necessarily mean a party every Friday or a barbecue on a Monday or dress
Ping
up
pong
for,
tables.
there you go.
Yeah.
But so what is fun? And that's a good question for your team. Like, have that conversation with them. But think for yourself too, when did you last find work fun? That's what we're talking about, is the work fun. So there's a lot to be said for when we get a break in our day and we do something different and we do it together. And there's a lot to be said for what's draining our energy. So as we look at it, how can we get rid of the things that drain our energy as well? And that connection piece often drives fun too. So simply sitting and having a good conversation with someone, we might say our day was fun at the end because we laughed. Yeah. And the minute that we laugh, we get all the good stuff in our system and we feel good. And then when we feel good, we'd report it as fun. So yes, it's an interesting one, trying to drive fun. And I, for those who are here, and they'll get the PowerPoint, excuse me, had a whole list of what will you stop doing, because what's currently draining your energy. And so, you know, look at what you're doing that's causing you to drain your energy. If you're still going to meetings where you're not relevant, stop doing that. You might have to ask somebody, but stop doing that. Stop eating lunch at your desk if you're back in the workplace. We really learned that in the pandemic. It's okay to take a break. In fact, it's fabulous to take a break. There's another F for us. There's so many things that we could stop doing that would actually lift our energy. And we have a lot to do with our energy. We're in control of that. So, you know, what does make us laugh? What makes us feel good? And where can we create that? If we go back to it, creating the environment. Yeah.
And I think I love the fact that you leaned into making sure it's meaningful to your team, relevant to your team. I think the other thought I had just totally ran out of my head. So I can't remember what that feels. I hate it when that happens. That is, it clearly couldn't have been that fundamental. So, but it's 8:44. Yeah. And so we should probably wrap up with our big idea, a couple strategies, some questions. And while Jenny's getting ready to pull that up, oh, there we go. I see it already. And school has started in Jenny's neighborhood.
I know, I'm really sorry. I've forgotten about that. The window wide open. I'm like, oh, there goes the school bell. So for those of you who are new to today, if it's your first time here, we finish every time we have a Friday breakfast conversation with one big idea, 2 strategies that you can take away and practice if you want, or pass on, whatever you like to do with that, discuss them as a team, and then 3 questions just to hopefully keep your thinking and keep the conversation alive. So our big idea for this morning was that, you know, we have a WTF often with people, and we want to just, oh, for goodness sakes, there you go, there's a different version of it. But actually, what if we paused? I had a piece in LinkedIn this week, the value of the pause. Just pause for a moment. If you're in that WTF moment, what's the flag that you're missing? What's the conversation that you might not be having? And so 2 strategies that tie into F's that we've talked about already. The first one, Craig, you got it in there a few times. Fundamentals was a piece within there. This is focus as well. For those of you who haven't come across it, Greg McKeown's book is excellent. We mentioned that earlier. James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, and his website, in fact, phenomenal. You could maybe pretend that was an F. But one of the things that he has in there is this paperclip strategy. It actually comes originally from a banker in Abbotsford, Canada. And the idea is that you take, let's say you want to get, let's say I'm writing. I'm not very good at writing. I talk all my life. I'm not very good at writing. So I need to get 4 pieces done a day. Let's just, I'm pulling at straws here. So grab yourself 4 paper clips, put them in front of you, And then each time you do one, you move the paperclip to the other jar or to the other side of the desk. You don't have to use paper clips. You can use anything that you like. But that visual cue and moving it across is really, really important. Some of you in your heads will have gone to the Eat the Frog that came from Brian Tracy. Similar, the frog is a single version. The paperclip is if we have to do more. In Craig's selling world, calling people, okay, 10 calls, put 10 paper clips on one side, and then get those 10 across by the end of the day, or in a row before you do anything else, before you even open your email, whatever that might be. You can translate it to so many places. And then the second one that we have for you this morning is, those who know me well, though I love this word, fika. Fika is a Swedish word. It literally means coffee and connection. And it's a habit in Sweden. It's like a practice during the day. You simply take that moment, go have coffee, go connect with a friend. And you know what? The world will keep going, but you'll stop for a minute. And then when you get back on the hamster wheel, the clarity is unbelievable. It's really healthy for us to connect, converse, communicate. All C's. Let's have a C day too. But this is good. So today, think about this. Who have you not connected with recently? Who have you not reached out to? We're talking work, so maybe somebody on your team, but I've no doubt there's someone in your life as well. Just make a little bit of time, half hour, maybe, if that. And 3 questions, and Craig, because it's our first one back, there are 3 questions today, not 4, not 6. We'll see how we go. But I'll leave those for you as well. They are all related to everything that we've said already.
Excellent. Yeah, 3. Good. I love the way you focused on 3, Jenny. So that's good. Folks, thank you. We're going to be back. And, you know, we're cognizant September 30th is a meaningful day here in Canada. We will have a special land recognition that we'll focus on and that we'll share. And perhaps the conversation around accountability will be especially meaningful that day. So we're looking forward to seeing everybody again in a couple of weeks. With that, have a fantastic Friday. My Fido needs to be flexed outside, so I'm going to go walk the dog. And yeah, there you go. Wrapping up the day with some really bad dad jokes. Have a great weekend, and we will talk to you soon.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Bye-bye.